Hey Rebels, welcome to Blasphemous Nutrition. Consider this podcast your pantry full of clarity, perspective, and the nuance needed to counter the superficial health advice so freely given on the internet. I'm Amy, the unapologetically candid host of Blasphemous Nutrition and a double-degreed nutritionist with 20 years experience. I'm here to share a more nuanced take on living and eating well to sustain and recover your health. If you found most health advice to be so generic as to be meaningless, or so extreme that it's unrealistic, and you don't mind the occasional F-bomb, you've come to the right place. From dissecting the latest nutrition trends to breaking down published research and sharing my own clinical experiences, I'm on a mission to foster clarity amidst all the confusion and empower you to have the health you need to live a life you love. Now let's get started. In today's episode of Blasphemous Nutrition, I invite Marty Kendall to return to the podcast to discuss data-driven fasting, a methodology he has created to help people better understand their body's glucose sensitivity and optimize feeding and fasting cycles to their biology, rather than relying upon these arbitrary fasting hours set by influencers. In this conversation, we discuss the benefits to finding your personalized glucose triggers, the benefits and drawbacks to CGMs, and what people, including myself, discover when they go through his data-driven fasting course. If you're interested in DIYing your own personal glucose trigger, be sure to check out the link to his free course, which I've included in the show notes. For a more handheld and customized approach, as well as to weave in what to eat alongside when to eat, you can reach out to me for customized care or join one of Marty's online group programs for specific information and support in finding your personalized macros, micros, and glucose trigger. I've been successfully integrating these concepts into private practice with clients for a couple of years now, and it is absolutely thrilling to play a part in helping those with diabetes reach hemoglobin A1C levels back into non-diabetic ranges, as well as normalizing the blood sugar levels of those with prediabetes and dramatically reducing their risk of chronic disease down the road. Additionally, implementing these tools helps people lose weight by focusing on nourishing their bodies and understanding their physiology better. It is just so much healthier than what we've been told to do our entire lives. All the info you need to learn more will be in the show notes. Let's get on to that interview. Marty Kendall, welcome back to Blasphemous Nutrition.
Amy, great to chat, mate. Always fun. We had a riot last time.
Yeah, we did. Couldn't quite get enough of it.
And we're back.
So today I want to talk with you a little bit about data-driven fasting.
Yep.
Which essentially answers the question when to eat in a very personalized, targeted way. And that's what I love about this, is it's not a random, arbitrary fast for this long, your eating window is this long, right? Like you've really figured out how to tailor it to the individual.
Yeah, it's not really fasting. That's the secret. That's the dirty secret of data-driven fasting. We designed it as the cure for people who are fasting for too long and thinking more is better. And, I'm not making progress with 16/8, so go to 24 and then OMAD and then extended fasting. And all of a sudden they're at this point of they're not eating for days at a time. And then they've lost touch with their hunger and satiety signals, more importantly. And when they eat again, they can't regulate how much they eat or even what they eat. And I know when I was trying the extended fasting thing, you end up, you give yourself a lot of leeway to eat whatever you feel like at that point because you're just so darn hungry. Your survival instincts kick in and you're eating the peanut butter and the honey and everything together that tastes so good and is energy dense. And you might have fasted for a week, but you're not getting protein or nutrients at that point. So if that keeps on going, you're going to get to the point where you might be skinny, you might even be skinny fat, you might be obese with less muscle because you're just not getting the protein and nutrients you need at that point. So, yeah, after watching my wife's CGM all the time and now my son's closed loop insulin pump system as well with 2 type 1 diabetics in the family, it just made a lot of sense to use your glucose as a fuel gauge to tell you when you need to refuel and to validate your hunger. And yeah, about 5 years ago, blog post, a few people found it, started using it, and it just blew up, and my life changed since then. So yeah, it's been really popular. It's been fun.
So essentially, you've done a bait and switch where you teach fasters to eat by marketing data-driven fasting.
Basically. Yeah. It's not, that is the dirty secret. I've done a bait and switch to try and get people to nourish their body regularly. Like most people come from extended fasting to DDF and end up eating, 2 or 3 times a day and making progress with their weight loss. So it's like they love it because it just frees them from not eating for days. People like eating. People want to eat. There's something nice about eating with your family and, the feeling of eating and nourishing yourself. And people want to do that. They don't really want to not eat for days at a time, especially if it leads them to poorer metabolic health because they've lost lean muscle mass. And yeah, that is a thing in the long term. And for the majority of people who are doing fasting, and a lot of them are the postmenopausal females who lean mass is really critical. It's really hard to rebuild once you lose it. Yeah, getting the protein on a regular basis, the nutrients is really critical. So yeah, that's our passion to just, go well down. You don't need to not eat for that long. Maybe you need to not eat everything and anything all the time, but we can help you find that balance. And there's no one right, perfect fasting regime that works for you. I mean, it's like your friend comes and tells you that you should refuel your car at, this time every 3rd Tuesday. It's always worked for them. And it's crazy to refuel your car with the same routine that works for your friend, that there's a unique routine for you based on your fuel gauge in your
because
car.
They've got the family van and you've got a Mini Cooper.
Yeah. Or vice versa. They've got the little Mini Cooper and just, ride their bike to work and just drive to the beach on the weekends. And yeah, and you're driving the Range Rover that's a big gas guzzler. You've got different bodies, different metabolisms. You need different foods, and your glucose is it's the most variable fuel source in your body that shows up in your blood that signifies the fuels in the rest of your body, which is really fascinating. So once your body fat is depleted, your glucose comes down because your glucose is the backup of all the fuels in your system into your bloodstream that you can measure quite easily.
Right. Yeah, I would see this, I've seen this before with people who get excited about fasting, or they read some of the books or watch YouTube videos from people promoting fasting. And they'll start off and it looks great and everything's fine. And then just as you said, right, they end up fasting themselves into a corner where by time I'm seeing them, they're doing OMAD, fasting 20 hours a day, and often also exercising on top of this, and then having these chronic injuries that they can't quite recover from, which is limiting their activity. And then their weight loss stops and they're panicking. And you have to re-educate them on how to eat and the importance of eating. And depending on how long they've been in that position, even though they may want to eat, because not eating worked for a while, they're afraid to start again.
They're afraid of food.
Yeah. And especially with, if they have a history of extreme dieting, they've already done that rebound weight gain so many times.
Yeah. And definitely the fasting themselves into a corner is a good analogy, because so many people, I just sort of see on Instagram about carnivore diet to the tune of yesterday and carnivore, magical diet that I'm now lean and carnivore is great and it gets you tons of bioavailable protein. But the point is that online nutrition communities become very dogmatic and belief-based. And once you've bought into fasting, and fasting is magical and can do no wrong, and all I need to do is not eat, you can back yourself into a corner where it's hard to get out of. And at that point, those people who have done extended fasting for a very long time, lost a lot of lean mass, probably a bit skinny fat, they just need to nourish their body with enough protein and then look at when to eat and dial things in. So, yeah.
And so how do you, why don't you explain to our listeners how they know where their fuel gauge is at any given moment?
Yeah, it's personalized. There's a personalized glucose trigger. So all we do, we've got a data-driven fasting app that they record their glucose before they go to eat every time they eat for 3 days. And just the average of that pre-meal glucose is their blood glucose trigger going forward. So from then on, you just try to wait until you're below that glucose trigger. So you feel hungry, you go, I feel hungry. Do I feel hungry enough to test my glucose? Yes, no. If yes, go test. I mean, that's a bit of a pattern interrupt in and of itself, which is handy because most people, it's a bit of a hassle. It's not really that painful once you've done it a few times. Most people are afraid of it, but it's actually quite painless, especially if you do it in your forearm, where I do. But just considering, am I hungry? Why am I hungry? Am I eating for every other reason? Can stop you from just mindlessly snacking and mindlessly eating in front of the TV. And then you validate your hunger. If you're below your glucose trigger, definitely time to refuel, go ahead and eat. So that's the cool thing. It gives permission to people to eat and that it's not fasting for longer is better. Sometimes you definitely need to eat because your glucose is low and your other fuels are low. You need to refuel. And if you waited for longer, you'd probably get into a point where your survival instincts, your amygdala, we call it Lizzie, your lizard brain comes in and makes you eat anything and everything. So if you fasted for too long, you end up overeating. So we want to catch that point just before there where you're depleting your fuels in your body, but you haven't gone for so long that you're going to make poorer food choices. So your glucose helps you do that. And then going forward, if you make good progress and your average glucose before you eat is decreasing, that trigger will continue to drop over the coming 4 weeks of our data-driven fasting challenge, and just helps continue to push people just a little bit, but not too much that they back themselves into a corner again. And just like in the gym, you don't lift the heaviest weight, you don't try to deadlift 300 kilos on the first day. You start small, you build it up. Same sort of process with progressive overload for your metabolism. But at the same time, you need a break. So after 4 weeks, we take a break, give yourself a week or two to eat normally again, come back and start the process over again. So you're not always depriving yourself, and you get to learn to eat normally for a little while to maintain your weight and then go again. So yeah, it's just really cool. We've got 10,000 people in our community, and we've got a million data points of pre-meal glucose that give me a whole lot of interesting stuff to analyze to see that your pre-meal glucose is the most important thing you can manage. So it's cool. It's fun as an engineer to have all the data to understand how metabolism works.
I bet. I imagine too, with the FDA in the United States approving CGMs for over-the-counter use now without a prescription. That's coming this summer, reportedly. You can get CGM in the States over the counter. Yeah. That will definitely reduce the barrier to entry that people have.
Yeah. CGMs are interesting. Like for my wife and my son who've got type 1 diabetes, definitely a no-brainer. And especially if you're on a closed-loop insulin pump system, CGMs can be unpredictable. You need to calibrate them, and every time you change the freestyle, you need to recalibrate. We can't calibrate with the freestyle, and they're more expensive. So in Australia, you can buy them over the counter, but nobody does because it's like $150 for a transmitter and $120 per sensor that lasts for 10 days. So I'm I'm all for biohackers paying cost price, but they're priced as medical devices. So for our purposes in data-driven fasting, we just say use a standard old glucometer that you can get over the counter anytime from your chemist or at Walmart or wherever. And an accurate for our purposes is better because it's more accurate, and you're not always watching the little squiggly line on your CGM, which can drive a lot of people mad. And every time
Just
they
like
sneeze.
Just like weighing multiple times a day, right?
Yeah,
Also,
yeah.
Same psychological mind mess
Yeah,
to
definitely.
clean.
Definitely. Yeah, so just it's not about knowing your glucose every moment. It's about validating your hunger before you eat. Am I hungry? Am I hungry enough to test? Am I below trigger? Yes, I'm good to eat. You're giving yourself permission to eat. And if you're above trigger, then you might want to change what you eat. You want to focus on protein and nutrients and dial back the energy because you know you've got plenty of energy in your bloodstream. Yeah, CGMs are great, and it's good that people are paying more attention to their glucose and metabolic health, and your glucose is the most important thing. But a lot of the time, you know, like anything, we devise hacks to satisfy what we think is the issue, and people try to achieve flatline blood sugars. So you've got glucose goddess saying clothe your carbs with fat, and you know, fat and carbs is donut, cookie, croissant, peanut butter, all the yummy things that we overeat. So
it's a terrible idea, and the fat keeps the glucose levels higher for longer.
Yeah. So you've stabilized your glucose, which is in some contexts a good thing, but you've done it the wrong way. So, she's got millions of followers going, yeah, I can tame my glucose by adding fat to my carbs, and it's so yummy, and I'm going to lose weight because it's healthy. And it's like, no, you've created the donut. You've created the donut diet. If we're focused on our glucose before we eat, primarily everything else falls into place. Once you drain your excess fat and glucose, then your glucose becomes more stable, your waking glucose comes down because you're losing weight and improving your metabolic health, and everything falls into place. You're not just taming the CGM, which you can do easily by excluding all carbs and even protein and just drinking fat. You'll have a stable CGM, but the glucose will be high, your waking glucose will be high, and everything else will be, all your markers will be messed up because you're just overloading with excess energy.
With individuals who have a high degree of insulin resistance and chronically high glucose, how do you have a sense with all of the people that have gone through DDF, roughly the amount of time that it takes for those individuals to start seeing some results? Because they tend to be fairly weight loss resistant. And
that's a funny term, but I never quite understand what weight loss resistance means. It just means I've tried every diet and none of them worked. But yeah, we see really good progress with people who start with a higher glucose. Their trigger will fall really quickly. They get a lot of real confirmation that they're on the right track because they can see their numbers moving quite quickly. So say their premeal glucose trigger starts at 200, it'll drop down to 100 in 4 weeks quite quickly. And once they clear the glucose from their system, their body gets on with using the fat. Right. So your oxidative priority, you've got to clear the glucose from your body as the highest priority because you've got no place to store that extra glucose. So the body just churns through the glucose as you wait just long enough to be tapping into the glucose, and then the body starts burning fat. The body doesn't turn to fat, but your metabolism turns to the fat on your body to drain that next once you've started to clear the glucose. So they make quite rapid progress. Obviously, if you've got a lot of weight to lose, it'll take a few months to get there. But people with type 2 go really well with structured process to eating, structured regime.
Yeah, that's what I've observed as well, that for individuals with type 2 diabetes, they are able to bring their blood sugars down to levels which their physicians find quite impressive. So,
Yeah. There's a lot of doctors, after they've seen their patients, use DDF, recommending it to their other patients, which is really encouraging. Yeah. And insulin resistance is really just, to me, we demonize insulin a lot of a lot of
mhm,
times, and we say we blame obesity on insulin resistant. But the fact is that if you're insulin resistant, your fuel tanks are just over full. And as soon as you start eating in a way that provides satiety, you get the nutrients you're craving without excess energy. Your body is only too willing to offload it quickly. And that weight loss can happen quite quickly if your body fat is filled up like a balloon and your insulin is working overtime to try and hold back all the excess energy in your body. Where it becomes hard to lose more weight, people who are really weight loss resistant, is that bodybuilder trying to get on stage in the bikini or Speedos at 8% body fat. To get from 8 to 5 is a Herculean effort. To get from 45 to 40% body fat is a whole lot easier. It definitely, the process works, and it's just a structured way to solve the question of, am I really hungry? Do I really need to eat? And what do I need to nourish my body with?
can you talk a little bit about the dawn phenomena? Because this is something that, having done DDF recently with you, like my blood sugar is always, at I'm air quoting here, pre-diabetic levels when I wake up in the morning.
Yep.
Between like 101 and 104.
Yep.
And
Yep.
it doesn't, for me, it doesn't matter if I have carbs at night, if I don't have carbs at night, even if I end up eating so little that I wake up in the middle of the night hungry, I will still have a high glucose level, what's considered high. However, I may drop down, into lower levels during the day.
Yeah. I wouldn't, for someone like you who's athletic and maybe on a lower carb diet, 100, 104 isn't really that high. I suppose a couple of points there, but to explain dawn phenomenon, it's just your body booting up in the day. So overnight, you go into rest mode, recovery mode, your glucose is low, your body wants to store all the energy and just give your body a rest. But from 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning, a few hours before you start to wake up, the cortisol kicks in, the glucagon kicks in, and pushes more energy into your bloodstream. So as soon as you hit the ground, you're ready to hit the ground running. So you're well fueled for the day, and that's dawn phenomenon.
Mm.
People who are insulin resistant, type 1 diabetics who aren't well controlled will see a higher dawn phenomenon. But at the same time, people on a lower carb diet tend to have higher glucose in the morning and lower later in the day. They seem to trend down. And often athletes like yourself who are active, it just seems the body wants to hold enough glucose in your body, even if you're on a low carb diet, to be ready to run at any stage, to run away from a line. So for you, who's very active and runs a lot, your body's probably maintaining enough glucose in your system to be ready for that. So 101, 104 isn't really a big concern if your body composition is where you want it to be.
Yep.
Your waist to height, body fat, those sorts of things. So probably not a big stress, but for those people who see a high dawn phenomenon, they're hungry sometime in the morning. It doesn't have to be what's typically called breakfast at 6 a.m., but if they get hungry at 9, 10, 11 o'clock and their glucose is above the current trigger, then it's definitely a good idea to have a protein-focused meal at that point. And as you said, your glucose drops, and then when you're hungry again, your glucose is down. So the worst thing is to start the day with mocha and croissant, and it puts your blood sugar on a roller coaster that's hard to get off, and you're hungry more often and not satiated. So protein at your first meal is a great hack, especially if your glucose is higher than you want it to be.
For sure. And on mornings when I'm not getting up and preparing for a run, which includes quite a bit of carbohydrate, if I do have a higher protein, lower carbohydrate breakfast, and then I test my glucose, an hour later, it's like it's dropped by 10 points, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, that
fascinating.
little bump of insulin from the protein, usually protein and glucagon balance each other out to achieve flatline blood sugar. But if it's a little bit higher than it needs to be, then the protein seems to bump up the insulin and help you lower the glucose levels. Whereas if you didn't eat, it might keep drifting up till 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then people are waiting for too long. And then if your first meal's at 2 and your next meal's at 8 and your first meal wasn't big enough, you're going to be super hungry at night and overeating. So that's why we say, yeah, definitely, if you can, when you're first hungry, eat earlier, eat a protein-focused meal, and you're less likely to be binging later at night, which is on the less optimal food choices usually.
I did notice that too. And there was one morning while I was doing DDF where I was in a hurry and I ran out the door. I had just had coffee, and then I was at a co-working space and I ordered like a little cortado, right? So more espresso, just a little bit of milk. And I hadn't had anything. And I get home at 2 o'clock. I'm famished. And so, I'm in DDF. So I take my glucose and it's like 107. And I'm like, what on earth? I haven't had anything. And my immediate thought was my body responds so strongly with, I imagine, cortisol due to the caffeine in my system. Right. And then the cortisol's just like, let's make sure that there's a lot of glucose in the blood because someone's going in for a fight.
Yeah. And that's how coffee works. It sort of bumps the cortisol and glucagon to push a little bit more energy into your system so you feel more energized. And that's okay. We're not going to tell everybody who does DDF that they have to stop their coffee. Your membership would probably plummet. But you can manage that. You don't have to avoid coffee. But you just understand that first thing in the morning when you have your coffee, usually your glucose might be a bit elevated due to dawn phenomenon and the coffee. And at that point, the protein-focused breakfast is a great idea. We try to encourage people to not add a ton of calories to the coffee. You don't want to be adding the MCT oil or the butter or the sugar and milk that we tend to load. When I went to America, it's crazy. Everything you can get that's called coffee is this sickly sweet milkshake. And it's like, oh, wow, I just can't. I love coffee, but I couldn't tolerate the 1,000 calories that add to their drink. It's like, wow, it's insane. The palate is just so sweet in America compared to Australia.
Well, everything gets a little dab of high fructose corn syrup. Everything, spaghetti sauce, everything has got sugar in it. I think it's one of the things that when clients start reading labels, they are absolutely stunned that everything, salad dressings and pasta sauces and things that they would expect to be healthy, even the organic ones, right, they just put organic sugar in there instead of high fructose corn syrup, but it has been sweetened.
Yeah, it's crazy that the palate just keeps on moving. Your bliss point keeps on moving away and have to keep on chasing it to make it a little bit more seductive than the other products to keep market share.
Yeah.
Where will this all end? It's a bit dystopian.
I think the writing's on the wall. It's just a matter of when and how bad it's going to be.
Yeah. Surprising it's not happening quicker, really.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a testament to, I guess, to the system feels desperately fragile, and yet it does continue to hold on. So
but then when people test their glucose, it's the real reckoner. They go, I didn't understand what that food did to my glucose. It rose more than 30 points. It's definitely not a good food for me. And I'm going to, this food and this food work for me. I can work out what works for me. And this meal allowed me to eat sooner because it dropped my blood sugar like you found. And I'll definitely keep that in rotation. So it's very quickly people develop a personalized short list of meals that they know work for them, that are safe and they go, oh, okay, I read the label. I realized that they've added tons of high fructose corn syrup to those baked beans, or that organic magical healthy
Right.
thing that said healthy, healthy, healthy on the label. But it wasn't, because it's got all this added stuff that tastes good. So I'd buy more.
Yeah, one of the things I really like about that too is that it is very personalized. You know, some people will have a very strong glucose response to, say, yams, but perhaps not rice. Or, you know, I was really surprised at how little something that is vilified as being extremely high carbohydrate food, a banana. You know, I had a banana and it was just like, my body's like, yeah, whatever. It didn't even
No
notice.
issue.
Like,
Yeah.
what's
And
that?
the whole foods will digest more slowly, which is great. It's got the fiber with it. It takes longer to pull apart than the ultra processed foods that are designed to hit your system with different types of carbs and different types of fat all at once to overdrive your dopamine. Yeah, but it definitely, that's where a CGM is really amazing, because it just, you instantly know that that food doesn't work for you. And if you know, one of the type 1 diabetics in the family accidentally get the wrong, you know, it's real Pepsi, not Diet Pepsi, you instantly know on the CGM, you know, it's a real ready reckoner of, does this food work for me? But
Right.
for athletes who are active, they're going to be below their personal fat threshold, and the glucose they eat will go straight into their fuel stores rather than backing up in the system. But for people who are above the personal fat threshold, insulin resistant, obese, you know, or however you want to frame it, the glucose is going to back up into the bloodstream and show instantly. But that reverses once you drain your fuel tanks, once you drain the liver glycogen and the fat in your adipose tissue, and then eventually everything you eat just goes straight into storage rather than backing up into your bloodstream. So you see a smaller rise after you eat.
I'm curious with the CGMs. I had the benefit when I was working in a metabolic clinic to test out one for a month and to see both how cool the technology was and also the shortcomings of the technology. For instance, something like taking a shower, going for a run in the cold, anything that changes the temperature of the skin would then have a very immediate impact on the sensor being able to read glucose levels or overestimating glucose levels. Are the ones that your family is using, are those better? Do they have higher quality CGMs for those who need it, or is the technology across the board still new enough that these problems persist?
Yeah, the freestyle is just, you just stick it on, and I usually can't calibrate it with the app. So I think with some apps you can calibrate the freestyle, but with the Dexcom, which is used for type 1s typically, you can calibrate it. So after a day or two, it's much more accurate after you've done 2 or 3 blood sugar tests to bring it into line with the actual blood level. But it can take a little while. They try to calibrate them so they're as accurate as possible when you stick them on, but they're not yet amazing. And particularly that's the problem with the freestyle in data-driven fasting, because every time you change a sensor, it's out by 10 points. So if your trigger was 90 and then you put on a new CGM, freestyle CGM, that's now reading 110 because it's miscalibrated, then DDF goes out the window and you have to wait a long time for your trigger. And it's like, just use a glucometer. It's simpler, cheaper, and doesn't do your head in. The CGMs read interstitial fluid, which is the glucose around your muscle, which for exercising athletes may be more useful because you're understanding the fuel that's near your muscle. But for deciding when to eat, you sort of want to understand the blood glucose, which is closer to your liver, which is closer to your stomach, which comes from where your food came from. That's where testing blood is a more accurate indicator of, do I need to eat now, rather than the the interstitial fluid, which is sort of lags by 15 minutes. So if you want to know, do you need to eat now, that the blood is more timely rather than waiting for the interstitial fluid to catch up
Got it.
15 minutes, half an hour later. Yeah, but we're trying to catch that point where, I feel hungry, my glucose has dropped. And glucose can sort of go along happily where your liver is fueling your blood really consistently and nicely, and it gets to a point where it starts to get depleted and the glucose can drop.
Mm-hmm.
That's the perfect point. We want to catch it if you can.
With data-driven fasting, what would you say is the thing that tends to surprise people the most as they're going through the course?
I suppose the foods that raise their blood sugar initially, and then for a lot of people who come from a keto background, that fat keeps the glucose elevated for a very long time is the second big surprise. A lot of people are well aware that the carbs are bad because they raise your glucose. You want to limit carbs, so therefore I'll just fuel with fat. And then they find that the extra added oils and dressings are keeping their glucose elevated for a very long time. So they have to wait a long time. And you don't see that or believe that a lot of the time until you start doing it and testing yourself, and you're, oh wow, the leaner protein, nutrient-dense meal allows me to eat again sooner just because it contains less energy, depletes my fuel tank sooner, and I can eat again sooner. So, there's a lot of misconceptions in low-carb keto sphere that fat is nearly a free food because it doesn't raise insulin as much as carbohydrate, but over the longer term, it keeps glucose and insulin elevated for more than 2 hours that we've got data for. It just keeps on going depending on how much you ate. It's going to keep you from tapping into your stored fuel on your body.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. One of the things that I didn't expect was the increased connection to my own hunger and satiety, because I'm a nutritionist, right? So I'm always thinking about food and fueling and nutrients. And I'd forgotten that I had forgotten about the hunger aspect, especially when I think about the mileage I put in each week. Food for me is very much about fueling, and taking some of those glucose readings and seeing, oh, I'm not actually, I feel like I should perhaps be at 80, 85, 86, and my glucometer says I'm 97. That's like, what? Wow. Let me see if I can hold off a little bit more. And just having that pause between the first rumble, the first thought of food, and then immediately satisfying that impulse. But, tapping the brake and just feel like, well, let's see what happens here. Let's just see what happens. We wait a little bit longer.
It can just be a pattern interrupt to think a little bit more deeply about your hunger. And we call it hunger training, where people observe their hunger, they notice their true signs of hunger, they validate it with their glucose, and then you get to the point where you don't need the training wheels anymore because you're tapped into your true hunger signals. But in terms of athletes, it can also be a real excellent tool for people who are fueling a lot of activity, especially during the event and during training. They can see, hey, my glucose is dropping, I'm starting to bonk, I definitely need to eat more. Even for the marathoners, they need to drop in a glucose gel earlier rather than later if they're doing an Ironman triathlon, and that can help them fine-tune the fueling. Most people are not doing Ironman triathlons or running for more than 2 hours, so just eating normally after they do their workout is a good idea. But the glucose can be a powerful guide if you use it intelligently.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything that we haven't spoken about yet regarding data-driven fasting that you want our listeners to be aware of?
It's just a ton of fun, and it's a simple process initially, But once you start diving into your own glucose, a lot of questions come up, and we've tried to unravel all those. We've got a 230-page manual that goes through all the different scenarios and answers to all the questions that people ask. So I went to town on that to write all the answers so I can just point people to them. And that becomes a real user guide for your metabolism once you start trying to peek under the hood and understand your glucose response to fuel and activity. It just becomes fascinating, and you understand exactly how to fuel your body and why you are or you aren't getting the results you want. So, yeah, and the community's great. It's the other thing I'd love to plug, doing it with a group, and we generally have about 600-700 people that do it together in each challenge 8 times a year. And yeah, it's really good to do it with other people, because when other people are doing it alongside you, you keep going, you keep doing it. You feel like you're not this crazy testing your blood sugar at work by yourself. You're
definitely that. I am so that person.
So yeah, and it's cool to do it with other people, and it just works. It's a simple way to dial in what you eat and when you eat. And we've got the macros and micros masterclasses that we talked about last time. If you want to take it to the next level, but that involves tracking food, and most people don't want to do that. So DDF is a really simple way of understanding your fuel tanks and when you need to eat, when you don't need to eat.
It is. That is another thing I appreciate about it, because food logging is deeply triggering for some people. And, as we alluded before, you can also take glucose testing to that level as well, where it becomes a bit emotionally pathological. But it is really nice to simplify the process of determining when to eat and just putting what to eat on the side. Or if you already know for you what is good for you, then one, fact checking it with your glucometer. Is it truly what is right for me? And then not having to focus that much detail on the what to eat, instead just looking. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. And yeah, validating and understanding your hunger, I think, is the biggest thing, and just being hungry enough to eat. And once you understand your true hunger, you understand satiety as well, when you're full, when you've had enough, and then it becomes less of a binge deprive cycle that tends to go on and on. So you just find that right balance that works for you based on data.
I think one of the things too that I appreciate about the group is that there's that caution at the start, don't wait too long, even if your glucose is higher than your trigger. It will bite you in the back end, right? That when that lizard brain goes off, it's so much harder to control the runaway beast. So
yeah, definitely.
And having that warning at the onset. And then I think most people have that firsthand experience at some point through DDF where it waited too long or something happened. I think it can help take the emotional judgment out of what is essentially a biological occurrence, right? And we've been taught through diet culture to be ashamed because it shows our lack of willpower, because, this, that, and the other. But when you have that feedback from the mindfulness of watching your blood sugar, having a target, but getting ahead of yourself, and having basically wanting your target to be lower before your body's ready for it to be lower. And then having to get schooled and just let your body do what it needs to do. It's a process.
Yeah, and that's what we have to tell people all the time, is don't rush, don't try too hard. And when people try too hard, they my trigger's dropping and it's great. And go, what? I tried too hard, ended up in a binge, and now my glucose is elevated. It's an incremental process, and there is no failure. There's just learning experience. And if you have a big blowout weekend where you overeat, you go, okay, it's going to take me a few days to deplete that extra fuel from my body. I understand. next time I'll be more cautious when I go to a party and won't overdo it. And because I know how my body works. And like you said, there's no judgment because it's just data. That's how I fueled my body, and I love my body because it's trying to keep me alive. My lizard instincts are trying to keep me alive. It's not about failure. It's not about I'm a bad person because I wanted to eat a donut. I wanted to eat the donut because I tried too hard to be good. So yeah, it's just finding that balance without judgment using data.
Yep. Yeah, the body tends to really not respond well when we try and push it too hard.
No, that's a good thing. That's why we're still here, because our prefrontal cortex would have wanted us all to be super lean and athletic, etc. But we have a break and we have a survival instinct that keeps us alive, which is a good thing.
Yeah. One more time, where can people find you if they want to look for you and try DDF?
Yeah, there's heaps of stuff out there. We've got a free data-driven fasting 101 course that people can check out and use the app, try the app, which you'll find when you Google DDF. And we've got our amazing community that's just clicked over 10,000 people, 10,000 optimizers who are on the same path and trying to help each other. So if you go to the Optimizing Nutrition website and go to the member login section in the top right, you'll get to that, and you'll be one of us and have a whole ton of fun with the little club that's all testing their blood sugars and trying to maximize satiety and get nutrients from the food they eat rather than supplements. It's a great community. I love it.
Yeah,
it is, and it's super cool that you hang out and encourage everybody and say, "This is the best thing ever. I love it. This is the thing I should have been taught in nutrition school that nobody taught me with all these degrees in nutrition."
I'm just glad I found it. Yeah.
That's so cool. Thanks, Amy, for all your support and getting the word out there.
Always happy to have you again.
Thank you. Chat soon.
Any and all information shared here is for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not to be misconstrued as offering medical advice. Listening to this podcast does not constitute a provider-client relationship. Note, I'm not a doctor nor a nurse, and it is imperative that you utilize your brain and your medical team to make the best decisions for your own health. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked to this podcast are at the user's own risk. No information nor resources provided are intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Be a smart human and do not disregard or postpone obtaining medical advice for any medical condition you may have. Seek the assistance of your healthcare team for any such conditions and always do so before making any changes to your medical, nutrition, or health plan. If you have found some nuggets of wisdom, make sure to subscribe, rate, and share Blasphemous Nutrition with those you care about. As you navigate the labyrinth of health advice out there, remember, health is a journey, not a dietary dictatorship. Stay skeptical, stay daring, and challenge the norms that no longer serve you. If you've got burning questions or want to share your own flavor of rebellion, slide into my DMs. Your stories fuel me, and I love hearing them. Thanks again for tuning into Blasphemous Nutrition. Until next time, this is Amy signing off, reminding you that truth is nuanced, and any dish can be made better with a little bit of sass.